Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the Belgian Football Podcast. My name is Ben Jackson, and I'll be your host this evening. And it's back to the two-man shows with our resident Belgian actually in Belgium. So he can't actually join us, which is ironic, isn't it, Scott? How you doing this evening?
It's very ironic, and we won't bore listeners with a long-winded story as to why that actually is. Hello, everybody. Hope you're all well. A lot of big news today, actually. So it's fortuitous both for us and you listeners that we held off recording from yesterday, which we normally do, and we got a couple of big news stories today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been quite lucky this year. And we've picked to record just after news is broken. So we are recording. It's the Tuesday. It's about 45 minutes until Club Brugge kick off against Sporting CP or Sporting Portugal, Sporting Lisbon, whatever you want to call them, the Champions League. But yeah, we've got a couple of news stories to get to later on, but just quickly go through the results from this weekend's fixtures. Yours side Genk, they beat Kortrijk 3-2 on Saturday. Obviously no Friday games this week. Mechelen, they lost 2-1 late on to Club. Standard drew 1-1 with Leuven in the Chris Coleman first game. Ghent beat St. Truiden by 2-0. Antwerp lost at home 3-1 to Charleroi. Cercle Brugge under temporary management will soon be under new management. They drew 0-0 with Union. Anderlecht left it late to beat Beerschot 2-1. And then Dende got a massive win over Westerlo 1-0 on the Sunday evening. Let's go to that for the first game, Genk against Kortrijk. We kind of joked how Kortrijk could potentially be the bogey team for Genk this season, but I don't think many people would have put Gilles de Waal scoring his first goal of the season on the kind of the Jupiler Pro League bingo for this one. When that popped up, I was like, that's got to be a mistake. I wasn't actually watching the game, but I was like, there's no way that he's actually scored a goal. And he hasn't scored since 2020, 2021 season for Kortrijk. And in that time, he spent 3 seasons at Standard Liège, so it's been a long goal drought for Gilles de Waal. But he wasn't actually the main story of this one. It was Patrick Ozowski once again. That's 6 goals, I think, for him this season in 15 games. Torsten Finks seemed to have discovered that Ozowski's actually a box-to-box midfielder that just works really well at just poaching chances in the box. He just seems to really be able to take advantage of that, which is hilarious at the age of 32. Doing his chances of a new contract no harm at all. I guess Genk will be a little bit frustrated that they let the game kind of get back on them a little bit with that Ambrose goal at the end, especially as the big one's coming up this weekend against Club Brugge.
Yeah, well, in truth, it was a bit of a hard-fought win for Genk, but they've been doing things what feels like kind of the hard way for 2 or 3 weeks, really now, their last few games. I think they are, along with Club Brugge, probably the only 2 sides at the moment. I remember saying to you a few weeks ago that I thought Club and Genk were the only sides that had the quality and the depth really to kind of go the distance this year. When a game starts against you, as this one did, they've got the depth there to be able to, throughout the course of the game, kind of turn it around, and really that's the story of the game. Carlos Cuesta having a bit of a nightmare, in truth, with this game. Torsten Fink kind of playing with a 3-man defence this weekend, which, it has to be said, didn't really work. He's hooks Cuesta shortly before half-time, as much to protect him as anything else, because he could well have been off the pitch by that stage because of the sort of game he was having, and I think it probably would have been fair, the red card that wasn't for him. But after he made that kind of tactical change and switch and brought on Kayembe, I think, instead, things kind of looked a lot more assured. So I don't think we'll see that 3-man defence any time for the foreseeable. Fink did hold his hands up actually afterwards and say maybe that was my mistake, to make that tactical call in the first place. We did see a starting debut for 19-year-old left winger Noah Adeji Sternberg, who got a goal as well. I mean, he's not completely new, of course. He's already made 10 appearances this season in various substitute instalments. But to start a game and get your first goals, interesting for him. Definitely one to watch, and one of the players I think that Fink's obviously identified as somebody he wants to develop and give more and more game time, much like he did with some rather interesting young players at St Truden when he was there as well. But yeah, the three-man defence thing did them kind of no favours. Hrasovsky, like you say, really great. It's interesting, isn't it, that often when Genk get themselves into the situation where they have to turn a game round and do it the hard way, it's often the older, more seasoned heads that have been there for a while, that know themselves, know the club, know their game, who kind of get the game by the grip of things and get things done. And Krasowski doing that for them this weekend. I mean, Fink said afterwards, he said, "Look, we can't win things smoothly every game, so there might be some weeks where we have to do it ugly." And they have been kind of doing that a bit recently. But I suppose the positive in all of this, from their point of view, and the thing that will help Joris sleep a little bit better at night, we hope, is that they are kind of getting through these games, and still managing to keep their kind of nose in front despite a few little bumps along the way, which Joris kind of outlined in more detail last week when we were talking about the Limburg derby. Frere Alexanderson pretty disappointed on the whole not to get something, and I can kind of see why. He said if we'd held our nerve a little bit more, then we probably would have got at least a point. But it's always difficult when you're up against a side that have got far more options on the bench than you do as well. So a good win for Genk, but an important one as well, because the big one's looming. Club away next, the one we've all been looking at for at least the last 3 or 4 weeks, and it's been interesting because that gap has been narrowing ever so slightly as well, which just raises the anticipation for that game, doesn't it?
Yeah, now down to 4 points between those two sides at the top of the table, and yeah, it should be a good one. The first meeting of the sides was a great one this season as well, so it should be another classic this weekend. Yeah, just on court, like you can see, Alexanderson's probably frustrated him more that again it's that unable to build like a successive string of positive results despite some positive performances. So you can each take a little bit of heart out of that they keep fighting, and Ambrose coming off the bench and scoring, it's a good thing as well. Like if he can just get some of these guys firing and stuff, that'd be good. You mentioned winning kind of despite everything and all that. So that kind of segues nicely onto Club Brugge and this Mechelen game. Fantastic atmosphere at the Acte de Kazerne. It was really, really good atmosphere. This one, De Kuip obviously getting the opening one, and then all the other goals coming in plus 90. I want to hear your take, I guess, Scott, on that penalty that was given and wasn't given. I think Lauerbach went down like a sack of potatoes. And every time I saw it, like even when I saw it initially, I was like, it just doesn't look like a penalty, does it? It just looked bizarre. To hear your opinion on that one. Two absolute misses of the season, this one as well. Talby, who's been really, really good in recent weeks, missed an absolute sitter at the back post. Benito Raman should have scored before he did score. He had a chance that he really should have put away, that Mile made a good save, and then Raman had to put it in the back of the net, and he didn't do that. He kind of like fell over it. Did eventually get his goal, and it's just one of those, if you give that guy time and space in the box, he's going to punish you, especially this season. That's 8 goals in 15, 16 games, I think he's got for Mechelen now in all competitions. He's kind of at Anderlecht. He was coming off the bench, wasn't he? And that's when he had his best season for Anderlecht, which I think is actually his best season ever in terms of goals. It was like 12 and 40 something. He was coming off the bench and he was a bit annoyed about it. But it's like Hazi's probably like, well, that's your best position. You bring in the energy. Looked like he'd rescued a point, and then Ordonez scores, and I feel like De Wolf should have done better. He should have done a lot better with that. It's almost straight at him, and you'd expect a keeper of being able to be called up to the Belgian national team standard to be able to kind of react to that and save that. And I think he'll be quite frustrated at that, letting that slip. And I think Hazi was very frustrated that they let that slip, was frustrated about a couple of decisions that he felt didn't go their way. Hayan obviously relieved. But again, another thing about Mechelen is that kind of injury list is growing longer and longer each time, and it just feels like they'll recover one player, then they'll lose another player. And it feels like if this squad could just stay healthy, like there's the makings of something really, really fun and special there, but they just can't seem to do that but in this game again, they showed like that they can still fight it out with the likes of Club. As I said, they go into that Champions League game with this win. The hope like, it's a big week for them, the Champions League. If they win this game tonight, they could be almost pretty much guaranteed of going through to the next round in one form or the other. And then obviously the Genk game, if they can win that, they close the gap to 1 point. And yeah, I mean, for them, they're usually like 10 points off at this point and do their run later in the season. So to be neck and neck almost at this stage of the season is quite ominous, I think, for the rest of the league.
Yeah, well, on club, I think massive week for them. You're right to kind of highlight that for a number of reasons. You used the word relief, and I've written down the word relief in my notes actually in relation to this game. But I think they got away with one a little bit this weekend. We saw that pattern yet again, which seems to be their pattern at the moment, has been for quite a while in truth, where they are. They're in control in the first half of games and by far the better side, but tend to dial out for a huge chunk of the second half. And we did see that again this weekend. The story of the game is really about the penalties that were or the penalties that kind of weren't. I agree with you about the Lobberbath one. I think that is probably not. And I was a little bit surprised as well. It was just kind of too easy, really. The handball one is the one that most people have been talking about over the weekend. It's the second week in a row now, of course, that club have benefited from a call in relation to a handball that was pretty obvious. Even the refereeing department have come out, the weekly referee and review decided that it was a mistake and that it was a penalty. I mean, I think people are a bit split about it, and I can kind of understand why. I felt at the time it was a penalty regardless, and kind of still do. And that's what's led to, people inevitably talking about conspiracy theories in relation to certain referees and certain clubs, which they're going to do. But that's what happens when you get a decision like that, kind of 2 weeks in a row. Mechelen looked like they'd got something out of the game, only to lose out right at the death. And a bit like Standard this weekend, classic game management situation, just see the game out. It's a ball into the box that just isn't defended strongly enough. Just kind of no reason for it at all, and you get a free header in the end. Sorts of things that really, really enrage coaches in a way. Just a simple individual mistake of someone not taking responsibility, and you've lost a game because it's at a key moment. Mechelen will be more frustrated generally, though. The 4 defeats in 5 now across all competitions, if you include the cup. So they're having an irritating little run. And I agree with you. I think the injuries are playing a part in this. It looked like, as you were saying, that they were easing out of that. And I said a couple of times recently, I think that I thought that, if people could stay fit and they could stay on that decent run of form they were on, then they could seriously push for a playoff 1 space, much like they did last year, narrowly missing out. I felt they could do something similar again, but you're looking at it now and thinking, that things are looking a bit patchy for them, in terms of their form. So I kind of hope that changes selfishly from a personal point of view, of course. But yeah, club, the important thing from club is they're getting the job done at the moment. And that's some undefeated in 10 across all competitions now as well. In fact, their last defeat was Milan in the Champions League. So being able to win a little bit ugly is becoming kind of quite important for them and will give them confidence. And confidence is all you need just to kind of, keep your performance levels at a point where you want them to be. That would make me a little bit less concerned about this kind of dropping in and out of games in the second half, which Genk will probably be hoping that they do again and that they can take advantage of that. But yeah, massive week. I mean, potentially they could secure qualification almost certainly, and go within 1 point, and that would be an extraordinary week for them. But both sides have got important fixtures coming up. Mechelen have got Antwerp, Westerlo and Standard coming up, all games which they will see as a good opportunity to get some points back on the board and kind of settle things down, and club could be in a really good looking position domestically and in European terms if they get the outcomes they want this week.
Yeah, definitely. And those 3 teams you mentioned that Mechelen face, they're all, let's be optimistic, for all of them. Let's say they're all top 6 chasing sides at the moment, or within a couple of points of each other, so it should be quite good. Speaking of standard, it's just such a bizarre thing to look at. 17 matches played, only 12 goals scored, but there they are in 8th, just a point off the top 6. Andy Sakiri scored again, lovely goal from him, and I have no idea how the Rika goal wasn't called out. I thought Hatakiyat was definitely fouled in the build-up to that. I don't know how they got away with it. Lovely finish from Rika, but I can just imagine if you're a Leuven fan and Chris Coleman and you saw the ball fall to Federico Rika in the box at that moment, you must have been like, of all the players we've got on the pitch, how has it fallen to him? Why has it fallen to him? This is the worst possible person it could fall to. It was a great finish. A really, really good finish from him, actually. I'll give him some credit. Coleman obviously delighted. The players pretty delighted as well. They did create a fair amount of chances in this game. They had all the possession and stuff. They just couldn't put the ball in the back of the net, which we know is their problem. We know that's something that Chris Coleman will want to work on. But it's not an easy place to go, as they say. Even if Standard aren't as good as they have been in the past, they're still defending reasonably well. They still make it quite difficult. So I had this game written as a 0-0, so I'm happy that it came out as a 1-1. It's quite a bonus. But if you're Standard, you Lecker, you could tell he was just livid, absolutely livid at the end of that one. And I can kind of understand. I think it was a foul, and I'm shocked that wasn't given, to be honest. It's such a crucial moment in the game as well.
Yeah, well, Hotokie thinks he was fouled. Lecco definitely thinks he was fouled. And Chris Coleman, to be fair, first time in the dugout, did say after the game, he says, I think we got a bit lucky. So I think he recognises that went their way and they were able to take advantage of it. I think they've probably only had a couple of training sessions together in the few days leading up to this game. So I think from now on, they'll have a bit more time to prepare and an opportunity to look at things kind of offensively, which we know has been their issue. And Chris Coleman's been talking about that kind of quite a lot. So I think he'll be delighted with that point in the end. Standards game management, I suppose you could question a little bit. I think, albeit a foul, I think they could have made life, a lot easier for themselves in that final minutes or so, the way that they were defending as well, dropped a little bit deep, that old psychological thing. So albeit I agree with those who say that it was a foul, so it should have been a moot point anyway, but I just think if they'd been a bit more positive in those final 5 or 10 minutes with how they were defending, then they wouldn't necessarily have invited that pressure as well. But yeah, I mean, it is absolutely remarkable that Standard are sitting in, what is actually a pretty okay position, all things considered, with those output levels. Equally, though, I don't think going into the sort of second half of the season that they can necessarily maintain that. I think, you could argue in a way that that's a kind of over-performance. I think it was you last week, Ben, that was saying that their home form is going to be incredibly important as to where they finish, because they are slightly better there. And when they tend to score first in games, that tends to be when either they get a draw or they win. That seems to be a pattern for them as well. Zakiri was really pretty good. Had a really decent game. Chris Coleman on the whole I thought was really positive, which didn't surprise me. We know he's going to come in and try and be quite positive, I think, longer term. I mean, if you look at his substitutions and what he did tactically in the game, he kind of went for it in the last sort of half hour, 20 minutes of the game to get something out of it. He brought on Shrivers and he brought on Indri. Byron came on as well, so he threw a lot of offensive options at it to try and create something. So he absolutely understands what the issues there, and that gives me a little bit of confidence that given a little bit of time and getting to know those players a bit better, that they'll be able to pick up a few more points. And they've got a really interesting schedule over the next kind of 3 weeks in the lead up to the end of the year. They've got Charleroi, Cercle and Beerschot, all very winnable games for them, and games in amongst sides, really close to where they're sitting. So if they can get a decent points haul from that, the overall complexion of things starts to change kind of completely for them. And that point he was making at his press conference about, I really want to aim for a playoff 1 spot, that should be our objective, and to try and push for European football becomes something, much more realistic, for that squad if they can do well over those next 3 fixtures.
Yeah, they can just take some inspiration from what Mechelen did last year. Like, you can put a run together if you can get the momentum going, and who says they can't? The goal scoring probably says they can't, but it'd be really interesting to see by the Christmas kind of break, or the winter break, I guess, because Christmas they still play. It's what situation they're in, and who Coleman is clearly going to count on, who he's going to be like, you can get rid of these, and how many of those you can get rid of these will be players that they signed in the summer, because there's always a couple that leave in January from this club, because that's the sort of basket case transfer policy they've been following over the last couple of seasons, isn't it? Let's go to Ghent against St. Sluden. Azuki Ito, one of the goals of the season. Absolute rocket of a strike from him. Fantastic goal. And this is the irony, isn't it, of you get Watanabe assist to Ito goal against Japanese owned St. Sluden. That the Japanese linking up to bring about their downfall must be quite hard, because those two players are probably both on their transfer wish list at some point, knowing how they operate. But to be fair to St. Sluden, they had a lot of chances. Had more the ball, had more shots on goal. Davy Reef was definitely busy in between the sticks, which he probably has been more than Franke would have liked him to be this season. Took Ghent quite a long time to then finally get that second. Max Dean with a nice finish, nice ball over the top from Ganderman. They hit the bar, they had a couple of good saves from Kakubo, so it's not like they weren't creating chances and stuff, but this feels like a kind of release a little bit for Franken, losing this game. Yeah, that could have been quite damaging for him. So he gets this win. They then get to go against TSC Baka Topola. TSC Baka Topola from the Serbian League in the conference. Currently in 8th place, I think they are in that league. That's all I can tell you about them at the moment. I'll have a quick look, see if I can spot any players that we've heard of. But yeah, good win for Ghent. For St. Julian, just more frustration, I guess, Scott, because they're creating chances. They're not playing too bad. They just can't get the points.
Yeah, I think on St. Truden, lots of energy but lacking efficiency. The performance wasn't really that bad, and there is an argument that says they could have got something out of that game if they'd actually taken their chances. I don't think that's an unrealistic assessment about it. Again, although unconvincing, they really needed that win. I think their first win in 6 across all competitions, so they needed that to kind of settle themselves down. And Franken actually kind of talking about this afterwards. I mean, last week I was saying, I think it's time we had a kind of proper dissection of the Buffaloes, because there's lots of stuff going on there. That probably needs kind of unpacked a little bit. And Franken was kind of talking about how he feels the football generally has been quite good for a little while, but just they haven't been getting the results. So I think to kind of get a result this weekend was very important for them, just to give them a little bit of faith that what they're doing is the right thing, because they have been so inconsistent. And you mentioned Europe coming up. Nobody quite knows what to expect from that tie, which just, I suppose, kind of sums up Ghent full stop. And it feels like we've been saying this about kind of Ghent for years, even when they've been in quite a good place. They've disappointed, and this season they've just been struggling to kind of settle down again with a lot of change. And I'm not sure, I've said this before, I'm not sure Rankin necessarily knows his strongest 11 yet. There's been a lot of little tinkering going on just to try and find the ideal solution in certain positions, a certain degree of rotation as well, partly to get to know the players and to give everybody an opportunity, much like we're seeing at Union Saint-Gilloise as well, with the change going on there. I mean, Max Dean, actually, who nobody thought would probably be the number one striker and the top scorer, currently is, with 6. And he could have a few more than that, actually, if he'd taken even more of his chances. He was quite harsh on himself this weekend. He was talking about how, obviously, he got his goal, which ultimately killed the game, but he said, I should have scored well before that to have put the game to bed. And I think he's interesting, because I think he comes into the club in the summer, doesn't he? And I'm not sure they saw him as really being the main man this season, and he's turned out to be that. on the evidence. So I think they're going to have to kind of stick with that and adapt to that as well. He's got the appetite and the energy, I think, and the attitude to just be an asset to them now. But there's loads of interesting things in Wouter Rankin's post-match press conference where he was talking about the squad and saying, look, this is a reasonably young squad, still getting to know each other as well. So I think he just feels he needs a little bit more time, and he's been given that time. I mean, I can imagine at a different club with the yo-yo in form that they've had in the last few months, he'd be a man under hot pressure, but it doesn't feel like he is, and I'm not suggesting that he should be, but you feel he needs to kind of do something there, go on a little run. I think the thing that makes the complexion of all of this look a little bit more positive for them is they all still are broadly in the mix of where they want to be, even if they are being inconsistent. So I think as long as that stays the case, then that pressure won't become red hot on them. But I just have this, they just kind of need to sharpen out up top, I think, Ghent. And take some more of their chances. They do miss a lot of good opportunities in games that would make life easier for themselves. St Truden just they know what they need to do. They're generally playing quite well, and their performance this weekend was actually okay. They just didn't take their chances.
Yeah, I think on Maxine you're so right. I feel like Johnson was the man they thought was going to be the goal scorer, and he's just not proven to be that at all. He's pretty, just not what we expected. I don't know. I kind of the profile of what he looked like and stuff like that. It looked like maybe this guy is going to be the striker they've been looking for, and they invested a reasonable amount of money in him. But it has been Dean at the moment. I think because Dean, what he may potentially lack in kind of polish and quality, he makes up for in kind of his desire and kind of the willingness and the what he wants to score goals. And I think you just feel that kind of like Bertuccini in that sense. Is it's that like very kind of similar in terms of may not be technically the best players, but they're going to harass you and do everything they can and be constantly looking to score, which is just a nightmare to defend against. Speaking of kind of wayward strikers and not putting away their chances, that's been Charleroi calling card for the past 3 seasons. I think I worked out this week that since Bio left to join Watford in, was it 22, 23? Maybe later than that. They haven't had anyone score in double figures since he left, let alone any strikers. But Stulic got himself a goal, and he got himself 2 goals. I would have thought, after we talked about him last week, he pops up with 2. First one really well taken, actually. I thought it was a really nice finish from him. Antwerp, strange result. This is kind of one of those ones where it's like, if you've got any aspirations of that kind of top 6, these are the sort of games at home you'd expect them to win. And I've been saying it all season, I thought they'd be good against teams like Charleroi and bad against teams that are better than them, but this was just a bad performance. I can imagine for Charleroi, it's also slightly frustrating they didn't keep the clean sheet as well. I feel like that would have been a nice 3-0 looks really, really nice, but they probably don't care at this point. That's a massive win for them, confidence boosting, all that sort of stuff. Whereas for Antwerp, it leaves a lot of questions, I think, for everyone, De Rock especially, about how that happened and why that happened.
Well, possibly Charleroi best performance of the season. I don't know if Rick didn't say that, but I thought they were really good, really up for it. I thought their movement and their ball distribution and their directness. I don't mean in terms of the old-fashioned directness with long balls. I just mean their choices of passing as well. They looked sharp, really good, and kind of Rick DeMille's been hinting that this is they've had this in them for a while. They've just not been producing it at kind of key moments in games to kind of take opportunities. We've seen flashes of it, but really good. On Stulic, this is an interesting one because I think have they found their new striker? Well, I think the data available at the moment, the sample's too small to be truly insightful, obviously, at the moment. I think we need to see a lot more from him yet. But on the basis of what we saw this weekend and what we've seen so far, promising start, I think, particularly because of the way that he plays his game as well. He's a pretty predatory striker, I think. And he offers them something slightly different to the sorts of strikers that in the past have done reasonably well at Charleroi. I think he just needs a consistent run now to see what he can do with that, and I think he'll probably get that, and he should on the basis of that performance. There's nobody else who's knocking on Rick DeMille's door who really has a serious case of saying I'm ahead of him. Interesting that Dan Heymans has kind of pulled back a little bit deeper this weekend, I thought, as well, to give Stulic the chance to be the lone striker. I thought that was interesting as well, particularly since Dan Heymans has kind of gone off the boil after that little period earlier in the season where, he was really enjoying himself and scoring a few goals. Charleroi only their second away win of the season, which is hard to believe as well. So they really, really needed that. And on Antwerp, really lacklustre stuff, really lacking intensity and any quality, which is unusual for a home fixture because they're normally pretty strong at home, regardless of the opposition. I don't think they were sharp enough at all. And Jonas de Rock afterwards was saying he thought the problem was just not working hard enough. And they're going to need to kind of address that because actually last week I was saying they'd lost a little bit of ground on the top two. They've lost a little bit more ground this weekend as well because of a poor performance, and it's coming along at the wrong time. So I'm sure they'll be looking at the big game coming up this weekend at the Jan Breidel between Club and Genk and hoping and praying that game's a draw, because that is by far the best result for them. They kind of really need to recover the form that they've been in up until this slightly sticky patch. I mean, I think that's only one now, I think, in the last 5, I think, in the league. So something's going on there. Toby Alderweireld, quite frank post-match as well, questioning some of the tactical decisions. And I don't think they lost because of anything tactically this weekend. They just simply weren't very good. Even Jonas de Rock admitting that. That's, we're not working hard enough. And in this league, you cannot afford to cruise through games and hope to get something out of the game. But some key players have definitely been going off the boil at Antwerp as well. I think Vincent Janssen is, suspended for the Mechelen game coming up as well, which is another headache for them. So how do you get the juices flowing again is going to be the main thing in Jonas de Rock's mind this week. But Antwerp have got interesting fixtures coming up, away to Mechelen, away to Dender, and home to Genk as well. So they've got an opportunity to right that, much like other sides do who are going through a sticky patch just now.
Yeah, not having Janssen is going to be interesting because they just don't really have that depth in the striker position, which has been a problem again. Slightly, it was fine last year with can't remember his name. The kid, Ilequima. That's definitely not his name, but everyone remember who I'm talking about. I just can't. Literally, his name just completely gone out of my mind. But the kid from who's left to go over to Monaco, obviously he was fantastic off the bench and then kind of took over a bit of the scoring role for Janssen. But it's like you said, you can't afford to coast through games if you don't have the quality to coast through games, which some of the sides at the top do. But if you're Antwerp this season, you just don't have that like you used to have it, which is slightly frustrating. Let's go to the Jan Breidel where, like Lapius did he said something kind of along the lines of after the game, it's not really the same stadium when Circle play there as it is when Club play there. And it's like, he's getting a lot of flack for it, but it's kind of obvious, isn't it? Like, it's just like, well, obviously it's not the same. And that's why, theoretically, it'd be great if they had both had their own stadiums. And especially for Circle, if they could get a slightly smaller stadium where they could really pack it out. It's like when Union go to Lotto Park for the kind of European games. It's not the same. Like, I do feel that if they could play at their home stadium for the European games, it would make a massive, massive difference because the atmosphere would just be so good if they could just pack that one out. But unfortunately, they can't. This one finished 0-0 anyway. Some good saves from both goalkeepers basically kept this one at 0-0. Gary Manny getting sent off, which would be slightly frustrating. Circle obviously have a new head coach, so Scott, we may as well fill the gap that is this 0-0 with a little bit of a chat about the new man in charge.
Yeah, well, we got the big confirmation today. I thought we were going to get it over the next 2 or 3 days, so landing very early is fortuitous for us. Recording today as well. We now know it's Ferdinand Feldhofer, 49-year-old Austrian coach, third Austrian coach in a row at Cercle as well, which I think is even more interesting. That seems to be the first port of call when they're looking for the right profile. Playing career, he was a defender, of course. Sturm Graz, Rapid Vienna, Wacker Innsbruck. A T1, most of his time spent in Austria as well. SV Lafnitz, Wolfsberger, who he got into Europe, of course, did reasonably well there. Rapid Vienna, and most recently, Dynamo Tbilisi in Georgia, and in fact, Cercle actually had to get him released from his contract there because he was still under contract there. They weren't doing terribly well, so I think it was those negotiations. I don't think were kind of too difficult to release him from that contract. He does have a win ratio across his career, 220 games as a T1. He's around about 47%, which isn't too bad. I think the most important thing here is they've gone and got a coach who fits their profile and fits the template, that template that Carlos Avina, Remberg Romant's predecessor, put in place, 3 to 4 years ago now, that high intensity pressing game, which obviously explains the Austrian connection as well, because the gegenpressing game comes out of there in Germany, of course. You've got that link. But yeah, I mean, Feldhofer absolutely meets the profile. So the template and the way that Cercle are going to play isn't going to change. Didn't think it would. I would have been very surprised if they'd gone for somebody who didn't kind of fit that profile. So Feldhofer is absolutely aligned with that philosophy, that aggressive high press, and also somebody who has a good track record in youth development. Dynamo Tbilisi's squad is very young, like Cercle's. Most clubs in Austria have very young squads as well, so he's got that in common. So he's got the two most important things you would look for. Interestingly, little bit of added juice on Feldhofer for you is his son Nicolas, who's still only 18, actually plays for Red Bull Salzburg's under 18 side as a defensive midfielder, which kind of amused me when I was doing a little bit of digging today. But yeah, third Austrian coach in a row at Cercle after obviously Miran Muslic and Dominic Thalhammer, of course. And it's going to be really interesting to see how he does, because I was thinking about this today. He's got one little added problem that nobody's commented on, and he's obviously got to deals to the end of the season. The job is, keep us in the league and keep us out of the relegation playoff spot if possible as well. That would be even better. But he'll be waiting as much as anyone else to see who will Kevin Denke's replacement be. His last home game this weekend, he was doing the rounds after the game, signing lots of autographs, doing lots of selfies, saying goodbye to fans in his final home game. Who his replacement is going to be a huge part in how Feldhofer does, I suspect, because they're definitely going to have to hit the ground running in order to, alleviate any pressure on him. That's for sure. And that added thing that nobody's commented on is he really needs to get some wins, because he's taking over from a coach who was, I think it'd be fair to say, by and large, adored by the fan base and is always going to be very well remembered. Most coaches, when they come into a club under difficult circumstances, having lost a coach that most people are pleased to see the back of. And in the case of the fan base here, that obviously isn't the situation. They're very frustrated with that. And today I saw some of them saying, I don't really understand this appointment. We're bringing in somebody who's really going to play exactly the same way, so why make the change? Which obviously backs up what we were getting at last week about obviously lots of things over the summer leading to probably what was understandably some tensions in the personal relationships inside the club, and ultimately that's what's led to the change, not necessarily anything else. These things happen, of course, when you work so closely with people in football. On the game itself, briefly, Cercle should have won it, I thought. Better side, created the better opportunities, just when things are not quite going for you, which they aren't at the moment, you don't get the rub of the green. The red card obviously then makes the point look like quite a decent result in the end. So they'll kind of take that and move on. They've got a really busy schedule coming up. On Union, very briefly, unbeaten in 9 now. So actually, by their standards, I suppose you could look at it and go, they're on a pretty decent run of form, but at the same time, in the broader context of how things have been going for them over the last 3 years, they're still tinged with a bit of disappointment. But Boccagnoli was saying after the game that he felt it was 2 points dropped for them. He felt they could have got something out of this game, but in truth, it wasn't a great game all round. And yeah, Circle will just be happy to move on, and because they've got a lot of conversations to have now with that busy schedule ahead.
Yeah, I think you kind of nailed it on the new man. It's hesitant for people. I feel like maybe the best thing that Circle, what they've done is they've looked at his record at Wolfsburg and been like, that's what we are hoping for. Do you know what I mean? It's kind of similar sort of, not a side that's the biggest in the Austrian league, but not like a minnow either, like a decent sized club. He then goes to obviously Rapid Vienna, like you said, and then Dynamo Tbilisi, where the expectations were a lot higher. So maybe he struggled because Tbilisi being 7th, you would expect them to be a lot higher in the Georgian league. Just this is obviously with like no knowledge of the Georgian league whatsoever, but most football fans have heard of Dynamo Tbilisi, like they're a well-known side for most people. So yeah, I can understand the fans being like, "Oh, why? Why have we just swapped like for like almost? And is it even like for like, or is it a downgrade? Like they could quite easily say this looks like a downgrade." But yeah, I'm really intrigued to see kind of how he can make a difference, if he can make a difference, because I expected them to go with someone that actually had some know-how about the league. That's what I thought they'd do. I thought they'd go for a short-termer. Sort of like Kortrijk did with Bernd Stork or something like that, where it's just short term, keep us in the league, and then we'll look for someone else in the summer. But that clearly isn't what they're looking for.
It's funny you mentioned Bernd Stork, of course, a former Circle coach as well. He actually, I'm led to believe, did get in contact with Circle over the last week or so and offer his services, knowing the club and knowing the league, and was reputedly told, thanks for your interest, but you don't kind of meet the profile at the moment of what's required, which I thought was kind of slightly amusing. I know that some Circle fans were saying today that they were a bit disappointed that they didn't go for somebody who had know-how of the league because of the situation that they're in, and some also were looking at Big Hein as well and hoping that he would have been the man. But I think all of that underlines that the fan base is still quite raw and sore after the events of the last week or so. That there's no doubt about it, and that was my abiding feeling about the confirmation of that appointment today, was that Feldhofer's really going to need to get some positive results early to just connect with that fan base, because they're looking at him thinking, we still love the guy we've just lost here, and who the fuck are you? Do you know what I mean? It's so he really needs, and it's a very difficult position for him to be in that. I do wonder whether he's aware of, probably isn't aware of, how sensitive, that situation and relationship is. But yeah, I think it's a reasonable appointment. I do, and we'll see how he gets on, because he's got fixtures coming at him thick and fast.
He does. Olympia Ljubljana up next, and win there, almost guarantee their way through to the next round of the Conference League if they could do that. Union have got Nice, and if they can build upon kind of the result they got last time against Twente, then yeah, that could be a big win if they could beat the French side, because that'll just give them a little bit of chance, because they're literally the last team in that kind of top whatever it is of that competition. Anderlecht's obviously going to be in European action as well. They've travelled to Prague to play Slavia Prague. They left it very late to beat Beerschot, as I said. Yair Sharon scored late in the first half, his first of the season. Anders Dreyer popping up late with a goal as well. So Hafi had given Beerschot a shock lead, I guess we could say. Nice header from him, though. It's different to his usual goals, which kind of beating as many players as possible and trying to stick it in the back of the net. Not Biscott, I guess, frustration for them that they didn't manage to pick up another point, but they're showing fight, and I think that's all we could have really asked for them after their start to the season. Whereas for Anderlecht as well, it's another kind of example, I guess, of what some other teams have done, which is just winning ugly and just winning. That's all you need to do. Like, as long as you get the win, that's all that matters. Although they did force Nick Shinton into a couple of really decent saves, and if Beerscott go down, I think a lot of clubs should be looking at him as a potential number one goalkeeper choice next season, because I think he's a really, really decent keeper, and he's really shown, and he's been given the chance to show what he's got with this Beerscott side.
Well, I think that result was quite important for Anderlecht, principally because it kind of keeps them in the mix of where they're looking to be. Obviously, they're in third, 8 points behind Genk, but we know with the points halving that 8 is obviously 4. But it keeps them exactly where they want to be in terms of the course that they're trying to navigate at the moment. Offensively, there has been a bit of an improvement, I think, on the whole. Despite Uber's slightly sticky start, particularly domestically, those first couple of games, dropping some points, I think they're looking more like the sort of side who can dominate longer periods of games and actually get the output that they want. They were playing, still reasonably well, obviously under Reimer, but not able to kind of see games out. Uber's kind of, improved that just slightly, I think. So reasons for the Anderlecht fans to be a little bit happier at the moment, I think. And obviously, as I was saying, they're kind of sitting where they want to be. Lots of interesting stuff going on at Anderlecht. When isn't there, to be honest? Yari Verscharen obviously coming in and doing his a big bit this weekend. A player who seems to have, had a bit of a fall from grace within the club. Lots of talk about the club being okay, basically, about him going out in January, either on loan or permanently, which is just kind of slightly odd when you think about what he's got to offer. That there's been kind of such a big change there. Very flexible player as well. We know how good he is technically, but it just seems odd that they'd be willing to let a player like that go, really, unless they've got their mind on a replacement who excites them much more than he does. On Beershot, a little bit of frustration, I think. It felt like it was kind of backs to the wall type stuff. There was a lot of sitting deep defending in the end, and they were kind of trying to cling on, and the actual Dreyer's winner I think is avoidable. Again, it's a game management thing for me, albeit that it's quite a good ball into the box to him. I just think if you track that run, he doesn't get the opportunity there. So it's just, again, it's a player making the wrong decision at the wrong time late in a game. That means that you lose the points in the end, because it looked at one point like they were going to hold out. So you just never know. But Beershot have got they've got competitive games coming up. They've got Standard, Kortrijk, and Leuven. And actually, when you look at the rest of the results this weekend, they haven't lost too much ground as well. So I suppose they'll be looking at it, albeit that was disappointing to them. They're not really any worse off this weekend. Other results kind of cancelled themselves out and saw them no worse off than they were kind of going into the weekend. So it's not the end of the world for them. Difficult place for anybody to go, kind of the Lotto Park. Been a lot of talk about the pitch this week as well, which I think is interesting, and I think we'll hear more about that. Obviously, getting into the winter now, not seeing the best of the pitches. Lots of talk about whether that's going to affect Anderlecht's form, particularly at home, because of the way they play their football as well. So, something to watch out for.
Yeah, it's not great for players that they have that are always getting injured either. It's just the injuries are stacking up for them as well. Like Dolberg might be out for the European game. Stoikens, I read, is definitely out. Amuzu, they don't want to risk him doing 3 games in a row, but they kind of don't have a choice. I think Huber said that about he was asked about Verscharen leaving, and he was like, we can't really afford for him to go because we kind of need him. And it's just, that would have been unheard of a couple of seasons ago, them trying to get rid of him, even if it's just a loan. Like, you wouldn't, if we'd told us that when we started the podcast, we'd be like, no, that's mad. But it's the injuries have really kind of stopped him from getting any sort of momentum in his career, which is a real shame because, before a couple of those, he looked like he had a really, really decent season a couple of years back. It's just a shame. What isn't a shame, I guess, for Deinze is that they won again. Not again, for the first time in like 7-8 games they won, but they've got this little bit of a habit of scoring quite quirky goals, I guess we could call them, where it's like they try and like manipulate things quite cleverly, like with their set pieces and their crosses and stuff like that, and different midfielders running at different times and stuff. And this week it was Nathan Rhodes arriving to head home completely unmarked against Westerlo. Third goal of the season for him. Not a bad return considering this is his first real season in the Pro League. I think he made one top flight appearance for Charleroi back in the day, but the 26-year-old then worked his way up from the lower reaches back into the top flight, which is always nice to see. So congratulations to him. And this is just, it just feels like a massive result for Deinze. And every time you feel like they're going to kind of go on this terrible, terrible run of results and stuff like that, they seem to just stick a couple of things together just to kind of right things. They obviously lost to Westerlo 2-0 just a couple of weeks ago, so to get a nice bit of revenge at home was quite fitting for them. And I'm sure you'll talk about it, Scott, but they've obviously got that massive game against Kortrijk coming up next week, and then a reasonably tough run against the likes of Antwerp, Anderlecht and Ghent. Obviously Ghent when they come back, and then a couple of other tough fixtures. So they're still doing well. I think they can be pretty pleased with this, and Westerlo it's just more frustration, I guess, for them, because again, sort of like Kortrijk, but not as bad a way. They just can't build any momentum this season at the moment.
Yeah, sort of inconsistency starting to really creep in at Westerlo, and they kind of got sucked in this weekend and allowed Deinze to dictate the game, especially in the first half. They were getting involved in a lot of the kind of fights, the duels and second balls and situations that they didn't really need to in a way, and found themselves getting kind of out-muscled a little bit. Deinze's first win in 2 months, I think 9 games, since the 5th of October, which is kind of hard to believe. But it's a win that kind of keeps their head above water and, out of that relegation playoff zone as well, which is really important. And yeah, I mean, I think they're better at home, obviously, Deinze generally, and they looked more like the Deinze we saw in those opening 3 or 4 weeks, who were playing kind of quite freely and confidently. I thought Fabio Ferraro, decent this weekend. Really decent showing for Deinze. This game's kind of the Timmy Simons derby a little bit. Obviously, him having managed both sides. That's both sides having beat each other now, so they've kind of returned the favour. Deinze making home advantage count actually in this case. It wasn't a brilliant game all in. I mean, Deinze I think did deserve to win it, and I think Timmy Simons is just frustrated because I think he felt that they kind of, as I was saying, they got suckered into the way that Deinze wanted to play the game, so they played their game rather than their own game. And often when that happens, a side isn't able to express itself properly and often doesn't come out the way that it wants to. They were better in the second half, but just couldn't get anything out of the game. Westerlo, I suppose, need to be a little bit careful now because that inconsistency's in there, and they've got some tricky fixtures coming up. I suppose they're sitting where most people would have expected them to be at the moment, but they need to start picking up really some points again, I think, just to kind of settle things down a bit.
Yeah, they want to be sitting nice and pretty by the time March comes around and not have to be worrying about bottom 4 or anything like that, which is, it's coming around pretty quick. Like the fixtures just got announced all the way up until the end of the regular season, which is always a bit of like that, we're in the kind of getting towards that. And by then we may know which sides are joining us from the Challenger. So let's segue over to the Challenger. Scott, why don't you give us a roundup of what's happened on the pitch, and then we'll probably talk about Deinze a little bit again.
Yeah, it's like a deja vu, Challenger Pro League deja vu. That's what it feels like at the moment. Yeah, so matchday 14 this weekend. Club Next beat Anderlecht Futures 3-0. Deinze lost 1-0 at home to Serang. Liège beat RFC Liège 2-1. Ral's good form continues. They won 2-1 against Young Genk. Zulte Waregem convincingly disposed of Beveren 4-0. Frank Baran beat Eupen 3-2. Lokeren lost 4-1 to Molenbeek, and Patro Eisden convincingly dispatched Lommel 4-0. So Zalta have gone back top on goal difference. Ahead of Ral, the two sides kind of setting the pace, and almost feels like they're kind of pulling away from the others in terms of their form at the moment. Anderlecht Futures and Young Genk propping up the table in the drop zone at the moment. Jelle Vossen is still top scorer with 11. He came off injured this weekend actually after only about 15 minutes, but I understand it's not too bad, so he might miss out this weekend, but will probably be back the following weekend, which is obviously positive news for Zalta. But yeah, the big story still is Deinze. Plenty of news in that today. So the club's lawyers and the provisional administrators were in the Enterprise Court in Ghent for another hearing. A couple of weeks ago, people might remember those with an eye for detail. Deinze managed to get a delay on bankruptcy ruling on the basis that, money was coming. Give us a little bit longer. They got the 2-week extension, which passed. Everybody was in court again today. The administrators this morning said, please file for bankruptcy. No money's come in. There's no evidence any money is coming in. We need the bankruptcy to do our job as administrators effectively, because the thing about it legally is they can't deal really with any of the debt or any of the things that administrators do deal with until, you're in that situation where they're in complete control of the club, i.e. bankruptcy's been filed. So they have asked for that. The judges have deferred a decision until tomorrow, which is Wednesday. So by the time you listen to this, everybody, we may well know, and it's highly likely it will be over. Intriguingly, after the court session today, AAD Invest, the current owners, released a rather strange statement claiming a number of things, none of which are very credible. Standard playbook in this situation, really. We've been here before, haven't we, Ben, where it's always everybody else's fault. It's the big bad administrator not doing their job properly, and these mysterious, nefarious forces out there. Maybe it's us, maybe they're talking about us, telling the truth and asking questions and communicating with people. Maybe we're the mysterious, nefarious forces. A statement that basically said it's everybody else's fault, but intriguingly admitting that they are now looking to sell the club, and they think they've found a buyer, which nobody really believes. I mean, this company that they've produced as being interested, it just isn't credible. And if you have a look at that company's own accounts, you'll see that they don't have very much working capital and money available themselves. So there's no money trail to follow here to suggest they're anything like credible. So I would expect the bankruptcy finally to become official tomorrow, Ben. I don't know about you. I can't see any emergency delaying tactic anymore, and everybody can kind of be put out of their misery, I think.
It's just, there's so many things to say about this, aren't there, that you just don't know how much you can say or can't say. But so this is how I see the situation kind of from the outset: is this group come in, AAD Invest, who, from what I think it was either Het Nieuwsblad or HLN worked out, they were registered to just a random PO box in Luxembourg, and they had about 12 grand. Not 12 million, 12 grand. But somehow they were speaking about getting 65 million when they floated it or something. And from what it looks like to me is they've been able to buy this club for about £1. That's how some of these things work. And you get a club for about £1 or whatever it is. You obviously then have to just inherit the debts. That's just how it works. And my belief is their plan was to get the club cheaply, delay as long as possible, use this club as a sign that says to other clubs within European football, look, we're a credible football-owning company. We're going to build a multi-club brand sort of thing. That's how I see it. I think they never had the money for Deinze. They never planned to have the money for Deinze. The plan was to use Deinze as a means of credibility to then get this club in Series C, which we know they're negotiating with to buy, and a club in the French second division. Once you get those two clubs, you can then go to these investors that they clearly believe that they have interest in and say, look, let's invest in this Italian club and this French club while we're here. we'll use some of that money to support Deinze, and then we could just use Deinze to kind of funnel it around or something like that. I'm not saying that's anything illegal or anything like that. Just Deinze will be that club that you can kind of move players around with and stuff like that, and they can do their metaverse and their cryptocurrency and all that sort of stuff. But it's clear that they've not really had the time to do this because they clearly didn't understand what they were doing. Like, it's so obvious they didn't know what they were doing, and it's now got to a point where they're saying that they've got this British American company that's interested in buying them. But if you look, I think they're just, if they are a legitimate interested party, they're just going to do the same thing, acquire the club on the cheap, and then try and find an investor from somewhere. And that's what the Kaminsky brothers tried to do with Kortrijk. Was they announced they'd bought the club and then they went and asked people for money. And I just don't get how this can be allowed to happen and how this works. And it just doesn't make any sense. You can't do it in any other industry or anything like that without getting completely just kind of blown to pieces and stuff. And what it's done is it's kind of given the fans of Deinze this false hope, basically, that the club's going to be saved when there was never any chance that, like, this 65 million just sounds like an absolute pipe dream, like where they think they're going to get this money from. And then, like you said, the fact that they said they told the directors they want to sell the club on the 3rd of December. Like, they said that was a clear conversation and this was announced or something, was what it looked like in that statement. But I couldn't find that anywhere. That's been announced. And what I think I said to you earlier, Scott, is that it's just a bit of a coincidence. And you were kind of hinting at the same thing, that no one could find a buyer for Deinze for months, but it's taken them a couple of days. And they just randomly seem to have found someone that's wants to buy the club. Like, let's be realistic here. This club is not a desirable asset for anyone to have unless they're already part of a multi-club ownership group like City Group or someone like that, where they can be like, right, the visa restrictions are reasonably lax in this thing. We don't need to get work permits for some players from other countries where there's clear footballing talent. They can go to Deinze and play some football in Deinze, get eligible to then come and play in this league and that league and that league. That's just, it's the reality of the situation. That's what a club like Deinze would be bought to do, or by someone who thinks they can get this team into the top flight and in European football, which seems unrealistic because why would that person with that sort of deep pockets invest in the second tier of Belgian football? So it's a horrible mess, and I completely agree with you. I think they're gonna go under or bankrupt tomorrow, and it's kind of the fallout will happen. And I think it's really difficult to not blame AAD, because I guess with AAD it's kind of, we're seeing this play out in such a small time frame that we can see it and we can criticize it so quickly. But it's the owners before them that have messed this thing up completely. They've completely sunk the club. AAD are just, they tried to, I'm not saying in a good way, they tried to make something out of this situation, but they clearly they were not the right people to be coming into this situation. They had no idea what they were doing, and you wonder, were they trying to buy East End and people like that as well? Like, were they interested in some of these other groups? And it's just so murky, isn't it? It's really, really murky. They're really unclear. It's like everything just came out of nowhere with them. So yeah, beware if you see them linked with your club. I think it's safe to say. Beware most investors at the moment, isn't it? Like, I know that English football's getting on with getting this regulator in and stuff like that, and it's kind of, it is needed at the moment. Whether that puts people off investing, it's kind of like, well, at that time, who cares? The cost of football's got too much anyway, and it needs to come down. And it shouldn't be that a team in the second division of Belgian football just cannot survive and is mounting such massive, massive debts in a league where there's just no money in it, is there? And I think that's a lot of what I've seen from people saying is like, the problem is that the league gets so little TV rights. If you want to get out of it, you kind of have to spend a little bit. And if you don't get out of it, you're then in massive amounts of trouble. And we've seen that already with a couple of other clubs. And it's, unless you've got deep, deep pockets, it's not going to happen, is it? So it's a real shame to lose another club, but I feel like it's just inevitable at this point.
Yeah, it is inevitable, and I think a lot of people, us included in a way, just kind of want put out of our misery because, it's been obvious since their name was first mentioned how unserious they were, as kind of football people. I think you make a really good point, actually, Ben, about ultimately it's the previous owners ACA, not to be confused, obviously, with AAD. They sound very, very similar. The previous owners, the Singapore-based company, obviously, ultimately, they're the ones who've killed the club because they brought it to the point it's that kind of at now. AAD come in and try to make something out of a situation for their own reasons, even though they're not credible, by which time it's already kind of far too late. The positive, if there is one, is most people who keep an eye on the detail know who these people are now. And as you were saying, follow the line through, and you will see all the red flags. There is a growing list, as Ben was saying, of companies and individuals who really should, wide body swerve if you're ever in a room with them. In fact, Apex Capital, which some people may remember, and a certain Mark Campbell, who's behind Apex Capital, the company who everybody thought for maybe 5 seconds or even 5 minutes it looked like they were going to be Ostend saviours, until it came to the point when money had to be transferred and paperwork had to be signed, and they backed away very, very quickly. It all got a bit mysterious and that fell apart. They look like they've reached an agreement with a Series C side. Whether that will get as far as completing the acquisition, I'm highly doubtful of, but they're still doing the rounds as well. So yeah, it's grim stuff. And here's another question. After the end of Ostend at the end of last season, lots of noises were made about sharpening the teeth at the licensing commission, and strengthening some of the loopholes there to try and prevent things like this happening. Well, nothing serious has happened with that yet. We've still got the infamous letters of intent, letters of promise being allowed. So in theory, some other cowboys could come along and buy Deinze for €1 off somebody, off AAD, submit a letter of intent promising money that doesn't exist, and we could be in the same situation. But that's much more difficult if the court files officially for bankruptcy tomorrow, because it then means the administrators have to follow the money and get actual evidence that the funds are there that they say, so that anything can happen. So I don't think anything is going to happen, because we know when these things are done properly, it takes months and months of due diligence and legal work, and that time just isn't there anymore. So yeah, it looks like we've lost a fifth club essentially in 4 years, 4 and a bit years. And I'm sure we'll certainly be talking about this again in a lot more detail next week as well, unfortunately.
Yeah, we'll probably go over what the ramifications are, I guess, for the rest of the league and the season playing out, because I know lots of people have asked what will happen if they go under, and I haven't really had time to look into it, and I don't think it's been properly announced what the kind of plan is. I'm sure there's a precedent for this and stuff. So yeah, it was funny. It was just the other day someone sent me like a review of a Belgian beer, and it was brewed in Mouscron, and I was just like, oh, remember Mouscron? Like, it's just, you just remember all these teams that kind of fall by the wayside. But it's a shame. But I think, yeah, it's kind of, it's clearly, if you want to go buy a football club, go to Serie C, because they're not very serious. And we see Italian teams at the lower levels go in and out of being existing and non-existing. Like, it's quite turbulent in the lower reach of Italian football. So I'm not really surprised to hear that named individuals are going for clubs in those sort of areas, because it clearly is a much easier market, which I don't think it's that difficult to buy clubs in Belgium by the sounds of it. But yeah, maybe if you really do like this podcast and you want to donate to Buy Me a Coffee, we'll buy Deinze with our Buy Me a Coffee money, because clearly that's what we could do. Be a good use of the podcast funds. But yeah, that's probably about it.
Our good friends at the City Football Group can't even help us finance that because of their own self-interest in Belgium at Lommel as well. Because I was thinking today, City Football Group are perhaps the only football network with any credibility and the funds to be able to do anything here. But equally, who's going to buy a club in Belgium where in the region of 6 million debts mounting, and no working capital on top of that? They're the only ones realistically who could do it, but they can't, obviously, because they currently own a club. So there's a whole host of reasons why nobody could conceivably ride over the hill to the rescue here at all.
I mean, the fact that Todd Bowley's been linked with like loads of different Belgian clubs and he's not even in come up once. So I feel like, there's no white knight in shining armor, whatever they call it, coming to save them, unfortunately. That probably does it for this week's episode. Scott, as always, it's been a pleasure.
It has indeed. Enjoy the European football this week. Let's hope for some wins for the coefficient, and hopefully the Trident will be back together. We thought it would this week, but circumstances have frustrated us. But hopefully our Euros will be back with us again next week.
Absolutely, yeah. We'll go through all that European action. As we speak, Club have already gone 1-0 down after just 3 minutes against Sporting. So, go head off to watch that one. If you like what we do, please leave us a review on your podcast app of choice. As already mentioned, you can donate to us as well through the Buy Me a Coffee. And hopefully we'll be back as a 3 next week. But in the meantime, thank you very much for listening, and we'll see you very soon on another episode of the Belgian Football Podcast.